The air in the dusty auction hall was unforgiving, thick with desperation, cruelty, and the suffocating weight of judgment. At its center, on a block meant for livestock, stood Anna. The thin burlap shift she wore did little to hide her shame, but her spine remained ramrod straight. She was a ghost at her own funeral, her defiant gaze fixed on a crack in the floorboards as the auctioneer's voice droned on. "Do I have a bid for this? Woman strong, back willing hands. Not worth much, but she's all there." Silence. A man in the front row sneered, muttering she wasn't worth a plugged nickel. The words were a fresh lash on a soul already flayed raw by betrayal. Anna's mind flashed with the memory of another man's smile, Corbin's smile, just before he'd stolen her family's deed and left her destitute. This humiliation was the final chapter he had written for her. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to cast her out. Going once, going twice, but as the final word hung in the air, a voice cut through the silence from the back of the room, hard as iron and dry as dust. And it spoke a sentence that would change everything. The world had narrowed to a block of splintered wood and a circle of hungry eyes. The air in Harmony Creek's town hall was a thick, unforgiving thing, tasting of dust-stale whiskey and the cheap sweat of righteous men. Heat pressed down from the tin roof, cooking the malice in the room until it simmered. And at its suffocating center on a makeshift stage, meant for cattle and cotton bales, stood Anna. Breathe in the dust. Breathe out the shame. The command was a silent rhythm inside her, a desperate beat against the tidal wave of humiliation. The burlap shift they'd given her was rough as a cob, a flimsy curtain against the stairs that picked her apart piece by piece. Her feet were bare against the raw timber, the splinters a minor pain, a small anchor in a sea of degradation. She kept her gaze fixed on a single dark knot in the floorboards, focusing on its swirling lines as if it held the secrets to survival. To look up would be to drown. A man's voice, slick with rot-gut confidence, boomed from the floor. What's wrong with her damaged goods? The auctioneer, a florid man with a stained waistcoat, forced a grin. Not at all, sir, just fallen on hard times. A strong back for field work, willing hands for the kitchen. $10 buys you the papers and the woman. Silence answered him. It was a loud, ringing silence filled with contempt. A body is not a soul. Anna's fingers curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She would not tremble. She would not weep. To give them her tears would be to give them the last piece of herself that wasn't for sale. Her mind flashed unbidden to a different man's smile. Corbin's all charm and false promises, the glint in his eyes just before he'd burned her world to ash and left her with nothing but the skin on her bones and the crushing weight of a lie she couldn't outrun. He had engineered this. This public ruin was his final deliberate signature on her life. $5. Then the auctioneer barked, his desperation growing. A bargain for a sturdy wench. A low chuckle rippled through the crowd. Someone near the front muttered she wasn't worth a plugged nickel. The words meant to be a whisper were a gunshot in the tense air. This was it then. The bottom. A place so low not even the most miserly farmer or desperate prospector would stoop to claim her. She was to be cast out, a piece of refuse with no value. The auctioneer's face purpled. He raised the gavel, a final act of dismissal. Going once. Anna closed her eyes. Going twice. She braced for the fall, for the final hollow thud of the gavel that would make her nothing. But it never came. Instead, a voice cut through the stifling room, splitting the rotten air. It wasn't loud, but it was hard as iron and dry as a desert wind, and it commanded the attention of every man present. $1. A collective gasp, a turning of heads. The voice had come from the back, from the shadows near the door. Anna forced her eyes open, lifting her chin for the first time. A woman stood there, framed by the harsh afternoon light. She was older, dressed in a severe, faded black dress, her face a road map of grief-etched lines. A widow. But there was no pity in her eyes. There was nothing soft in her at all. Her gaze was unflinching, her posture as rigid as a fence post. The auctioneer blinked, stunned. $1, ma'am, the bidding starts at— You asked for a bid, the woman interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. I made one. Is there another? The men in the hall, so bold, moments before now, shuffled their feet and looked away, silenced by this grim, unmovable woman. She was one of them, a townswoman, but she was not with them. Sold, the auctioneer snapped, slamming the gavel down with a crack that made Anna flinch. To the widow Martha for $1. The journey from the town hall was a walk through a valley of ghosts. Martha paid the $1, signed a paper with a swift, jagged signature, and then turned to Anna. She didn't offer a hand or a kind word. She simply nodded toward the door. Come. Anna followed her bare feet, tender on the hot, dusty street. The town watched them go, whispers trailing in their wake like vultures circling a fresh kill. Martha walked ahead, never looking back, her stride long and purposeful. Anna trailed behind a shadow, tethered by a single, unbelievable $1. It wasn't a rescue. It felt like a claiming. She had merely traded a cage of many eyes for a cage of one. They walked for what felt like an eternity, leaving the last vestiges of Harmony Creek behind. The open country stretched before them, a canvas of baked earth and bruised purple hills. The silence between them was absolute, broken only by the crunch of Martha's boots and the soft, pained whisper of Anna's bare feet on the gravel. What kind of son was waiting? A lonely farmer, a cruel taskmaster. The mystery was a cold knot of dread in Anna's stomach. As the sun began to bleed across the horizon, a shape emerged from the gloom. A farmhouse. It was a skeletal frame of a place, weathered to a silver gray, its shoulders slumped against the vast, empty sky. A single weak light flickered in one window, a lonely star in the encroaching darkness. This was her new home, or her new prison. Martha stopped at the sagging porch steps and finally turned to face her. In the dying light, Anna could see the profound, bottomless exhaustion in the older woman's eyes. He's inside, Martha said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion Anna could name. My son, he's waiting for you. She pushed the warped wooden door open with a low groan, revealing a dim, lamplit room. And Anna's heart hammered against her ribs as she took a step forward into the shadows to meet her fate. The groan of the door was the sound of a closing tomb. Anna stepped across the threshold, and the shadows of the house swallowed her whole. The room was scoured clean but relentlessly bare, the sparse furniture clinging to the walls as if afraid of the empty space in the center. It smelled of wood smoke, lye soap, and a sorrow so old it had become part of the air itself. There was a man by the cold hearth, his shoulders broad and powerful, his hands resting on the arms of a high-backed wooden chair. Her promised husband, her owner. Then he turned his head and the illusion shattered. He was younger than she'd expected, with a face that might have been handsome before bitterness had carved its own story there. His eyes, a startling stormy gray, were not waiting for her. They were assessing her, stripping her down with a cold fire that was somehow more violating than the leers of the men in town. She felt her own gaze drop, tracing the line of his body in the chair. Down past the worn denim shirt, past the strong hands to the legs beneath the table. One was braced awkwardly. The other was gone from the knee, down the empty trouser leg, pinned up with a grim neatness. A broken man. A broken farm. And her, the broken tool, meant to fix it all. So this is it, he said, his voice a low, gravelly thing rough with disuse and disdain. This is the $1's worth of help you found, mother. He didn't look at Anna, but at Martha, who stood rigidly by the door. Her name is Anna Martha, stated her tone, leaving no room for reply. She'll have the back room. She starts at sunrise. The man Leo finally turned his furious, captive eyes on Anna. A muscle worked in his jaw. Can she swing an axe? Can she plow a straight line? Or did you just buy me another mouth to feed while this whole place rots back into the dirt?" The cruelty was a physical blow, but Anna, still numb from the auction, found a strange, cold calm settling over her. She had survived the judgment of a town. She would survive the judgment of this one man. She lifted her chin and met his gaze, her own eyes holding the flat, weary truth of her situation. She said nothing. Her silence was the only answer she had left. A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed Leo's face. He seemed to expect tears or pleading. He got neither. With a grunt of disgust, he turned his chair with a powerful twist of his shoulders and wheeled himself toward a darker corner of the room, the sound of the wooden wheels on the floorboards a lonely, grinding rhythm. From one cage to another, but this one had a sky. The back room was little more than a closet with a thin straw mattress on the floor and a single high window that showed only a sliver of the star-dusted night. There were no comforts here. It was a place for a tool, not a person. Anna sank onto the mattress, the rough straw pricking her skin. She didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside her, a glacier of grief she hadn't the strength to thaw. She simply lay in the darkness, listening to the two alien heartbeats of the house, the soft, restless pacing of Martha in the main room, and the occasional angry scrape of Leo's chair. Sunrise was a merciless slash of pink and orange across the horizon. Martha was already up a wraith in the gray dawn, handing Anna a worn dress and a pair of scuffed boots. They were old, but they were clean. They were a shield. "The well pump needs priming." Martha said, her words clipped. "The woodpile is low. The east fence is down." It was a litany of decay, a map of their desperation. There was no explanation of the arrangement, no mention of marriage or companionship. It was a list of chores, a contract written in unspoken desperation. The work was a brutal baptism. The pump handle was a stubborn iron beast that fought her with every pull, her muscles screaming in protest. The axe was heavy and awkward, and her first few swings barely bit into the wood. All the while she felt his eyes on her. Leo sat on the porch, a silent, brooding sentinel, his gaze a physical weight on her back. He watched every failed attempt, every clumsy movement. His judgment was a constant, unspoken commentary, more damning than any insult. She refused to falter under his stare. She worked until her hands were raw, until her back was a single screaming nerve, until sweat and dust caked her skin. She was clumsy, yes. Weak, yes. But she was not a quitter. Each swing of the axe, each bucket of water hauled was a tiny act of defiance, a declaration that she was more than the broken thing they had bought. Late that afternoon, as she struggled to mend a section of the collapsed fence, her hands bleeding from the splintered wood, she heard their voices from inside the house, low and tense, drifting through an open window. "Not enough, Mother. Her hands are soft. She'll break before the first frost." It was Leo, his voice laced with a raw, painful frustration. "She has a fire in her." Martha's voice returned tight and low. "I saw it. It's more than we had yesterday. Fire won't stop Corbin from calling our note." Leo shot back, and the name hit Anna like a physical blow. Corbin. The man from her past was a shadow in this house, too. "He knows we're weak. He's just waiting, circling." Anna froze her hand, still on the fence post. The world tilted the pieces of her broken life, and their broken lives beginning to slide into a terrifying new picture. Corbin wasn't just her demon. He was theirs. Was this a coincidence, or had she been brought by some cruel twist of fate directly into the heart of his next conquest? She finished the fence in a haze, her mind reeling. As dusk settled, painting the sky in soft bruised colors, she stood back looking at the clumsy but functional repair. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. She turned to go back to the house and saw him still on the porch, a silhouette against the lamplight. She expected another glare of contempt. Instead, his voice cut through the growing dark as rough as before, but with a different edge to it. "You're using too much of your back," he said, not looking at her. "You'll be useless by tomorrow. Use your legs. The power comes from the earth." It wasn't praise, it wasn't kindness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was instruction. A single grudging crack in the wall of his resentment. And in the vast, lonely silence of the failing farm, it sounded to Anna almost like hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm stark and spare as the landscape itself. It was a language made of work and weariness, of silence and sun. Anna would rise in the gray pre-dawn chill, her body a map of new aches, and find a tin plate of cold biscuits and a cup of bitter coffee left for her on the kitchen table. Martha would already be gone, a phantom in the fields, her small, relentless figure moving against the vast horizon. And Leo would be on the porch. Always on the porch. His instructions, continued sharp commands, barked from his chair. "The angle of the blade is wrong. You're fighting the grain. You're wasting water. Pour at the root, not the leaf. That's not a knot for a fence post. A strong wind will pull it apart." His voice was the scrape of rock on rock, but it pointed the way to water. He never offered a word of praise, never a softening of his tone. But his eyes, once so full of contempt, now held a different quality. They followed her movements with a fierce, critical focus, the focus of a craftsman watching a tool, yes, but a tool he was slowly, grudgingly teaching to do its work. Anna learned to listen past the anger in his voice to the knowledge beneath. His bitterness was a wall, but his words were a gate, and she walked through it every day. She learned to feel the heft of the axe, to let her legs, not her back, bear the weight of the work. The earth was an honest master. It gave back exactly what you put in, unlike men. Her hands, once soft, became a cartography of her labor, calloused, scarred, and strong. She felt a change in herself, a hardening not of the heart, but of the will. She was no longer the shamed creature on the auction block. She was a woman who could mend a fence chop, a cord of wood, and face down the silent judgment of a broken man. The shift came on a Tuesday. The air was heavy, the sky the color of a fresh bruise, threatening a storm that wouldn't break. Anna was splitting the last of a stubborn log pile exhaustion, making her movements clumsy. The axe, slick with sweat, glanced off the wood on a downswing. It wasn't a deep cut, but a searing white-hot line of pain shot up her forearm. She cried out, dropping the handle, blood welling up dark and immediate against her dusty skin. Before she could even process the shock, there was a frantic scraping sound from the porch. Leo was there, his face a mask of alarm, his knuckles white as he propelled his chair down the rough-hewn ramp he'd built. He moved with a desperate, awkward speed, the chair lurching, nearly tipping. "Mother!" He roared, his voice cracking with an unfamiliar urgency. Martha appeared from the barn, her face impassive as ever, but her eyes took in the scene in a single, sharp glance. She moved to Anna, her touch surprisingly gentle as she examined the gash. "It's clean. Come inside." Inside, as Martha washed the wound with carbolic soap that stung like fire, Leo sat by the table, his breathing ragged. He didn't look at Anna, but she could feel the heat of his gaze, a frantic, worried energy that was a world away from his usual cold scrutiny. He pushed a strip of clean linen across the table toward his mother. "Use this," he grunted. 3 silent people in a house of ghosts, learning a new language made of work and bread and shared unspoken fears. As Martha bandaged her arm, their heads bent close together, Anna felt a strange, unexpected sensation. For the first time since her world had crumbled, she wasn't entirely alone. The pain in her arm was real, but the silent, frantic concern of the man in the chair and the brusque, efficient care of the woman beside her felt just as real. A hairline crack appeared in the glacier of her grief. The illusion of peace was shattered 2 days later by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A lone rider, his silver badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. Sheriff Miller. He was a thick-set man whose allegiance everyone knew was not to the law, but to the man who paid him best. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his eyes sweeping over the farm with a proprietary air. "Martha," he said, tipping his hat with a mockery of respect. "Just making my rounds. Heard you had some new help." His gaze slid to Anna, oily and appraising, before settling on Leo's chair on the porch. "What do you want?" Miller Martha asked, stepping out of the house to meet him, her body a thin but unmovable shield. "Just a friendly reminder," the sheriff said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Mr. Corbin was asking after you. This month's payment on your loan is due end of the week. He's a stickler for schedules, you know." He held out the paper. It was an official notice, a death sentence on cheap paper. Leo's hands clenched on the arms of his chair, his whole body rigid with a helpless, burning rage. Martha did not take the paper. "We know the date. Just so you do," Miller smirked. "Times are tough. It'd be a shame to lose the family land, especially after the accident." He let the words hang in the air, a deliberate, cruel poison. He looked from Leo's useless legs to Anna. "Corbin's a powerful man to have as an enemy. Some people learn that the hard way." He tipped his hat again, swung back onto his horse, and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and silent dread in his wake. The three of them stood in the aftermath, the unspoken threat shimmering in the air. The loan, the accident, Corbin. It was all one story, one tightening rope around their necks. Later, as twilight softened the hard edges of the world, Anna saw Martha standing by the window looking out at the fields. The older woman held a small framed photograph, her thumb stroking the glass with a tenderness Anna had never seen. For a moment the iron mask of the stoic widow fell away, and Anna saw only a mother, her heart broken, her shoulders stooped under an impossible weight. The grief in that small silent gesture was more profound than any scream. Martha turned, catching Anna's eye. Her composure snapped back into place, but not before Anna had seen the truth. "He thinks we're broken," Martha said, her voice low, but with a new dangerous edge of defiance. She looked from Anna's bandaged arm to the empty space where the sheriff had stood, and then to her son on the porch. "He thinks he can just sweep us away like dust." She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Anna's no longer as a mistress to a servant, but as one fighter to another. He's wrong. That night the house was no longer a place of silent, orbiting grief. The air itself had changed. It was sharp, thin, and charged with the electric hum of a coming storm. The three of them sat at the rough-hewn kitchen table, the lamp casting their shadows long and stark against the walls. They were a strange, broken trinity, the stoic widow, the crippled son, and the bought girl. But for the first time they were not three separate souls adrift in misery. They were a council of war. They were three single threads, weak and frayed. But that night they began to weave themselves into a rope. "He'll send Miller back with foreclosure papers by the end of the week." Martha said, her voice a flat, hard statement of fact. "We have no money. The law is his. The town is his. We cannot fight him on his terms." She looked at her son, her gaze holding a lifetime of shared pain and unbreakable love. "But this land is ours." Leo leaned forward, the lamplight carving deep shadows into the hollows of his face. The bitter mask of resentment had been burned away, replaced by an expression of sharp, cold clarity. His body was a prison, but his mind was free, and it was a dangerous thing. "Then we fight him on our terms." Leo said, his voice low and intense. He picked up a burnt stick from the kindling box and began to draw on the back of the foreclosure notice, turning their death sentence into a battlefield map. "We can't outfight him. We can't outspend him. So we have to choke him." He drew a long, wavering line. "The creek. It cuts through our south pasture here before it runs down into the valley where he has his stamp mill." His finger tapped the drawing. That mill is his heart, and the water is its blood. He needs thousands of gallons a day to wash the ore. Without it, his entire operation grinds to a halt. Anna watched her breath held tight in her chest. She saw the plan taking shape in the charcoal lines, a desperate, brilliant piece of strategy born from a deep knowledge of the land. His mind was a map of the battlefield she would have to walk. "We dam the creek," Leo finished, looking up, his stormy gray eyes locking directly with Anna's. "We build it at night where the canyon narrows. It will take every rock, every fallen log we can find. It will be back-breaking, brutal work. And it has to be done before he sends his men." He didn't have to say the rest. "It's work I cannot do." The unspoken words hung between them, a chasm of his own personal hell. But in his gaze there was no plea for pity. It was a question, a challenge, an offer. He was offering her the one thing no one else had a weapon to fight back. Anna looked at the map. She looked at Martha's hard, determined face. She looked at Leo's, and for the first time she saw past the broken man to the fierce strategist trapped inside. She thought of Corbin's smug smile, of Sheriff Miller's cruel eyes, of the suffocating weight of her own helplessness. That weight was finally lifting. "Tell me where to start," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was the sound of an oath, the sound of a choice being made. A faint, almost imperceptible nod from Martha, a flicker of something that might have been respect in Leo's eyes. For the next hour, he spoke, his voice losing its rough edge, becoming the sharp, precise instrument of a commander laying out his strategy. He described the bend in the creek, the natural fall of the land, the best places to find the rocks and timber she would need. He spoke of leverage and foundations, of angles and flow. As he talked, he sketched, his hands moving with a fluid grace. At one point, to clarify a detail, his hand brushed hers on the table. The touch was brief, accidental, but a current passed between them, the stark electric intimacy of co-conspirators, of two soldiers sharing a map before a battle. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, a single candle in a hurricane, but it was all they had. They would not just build a dam. They would build a wall against the world that had tried to crush them. Later, when the moon was a high silver sliver in the ink-black sky, Anna slipped out of the house. She carried a shovel and a length of frayed rope. The air was cold, alive with the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind through the dry grass. It was the sound of a world that did not care. She reached the south pasture, the sound of the gurgling creek, a soft, constant murmur in the dark. This was it, the place he had described, the narrow throat in the earth where their rebellion would begin. She looked back toward the farmhouse, a single point of faint, defiant light in the overwhelming darkness. She was tired. Her body ached. Her arm still throbbed from the axe wound. But as she wedged the shovel into the earth and pried the first heavy stone from the creek bed, she felt a strength she had never known. It was the strength of a woman who was no longer running. She hoisted the rock, its rough edges digging into her skin, and took a staggering step into the cold, flowing water. The fate of 3 people of a small, forgotten piece of land rested on the stones she would move this night. And she would not falter. The nights became a secret world of their own, belonging only to Anna the moon and the groaning weight of the earth. Under the vast, indifferent gaze of the stars, she labored. Each stone she hauled from the creek bed was a penance and a prayer, its cold weight a testament to her newfound purpose. Her muscles screamed, her hands bled, but she did not stop. Every stone she moved was a word in their defiant answer to the world. She was not alone. In the deepest dark, Martha would appear, a silent specter with a lantern and a flask of hot sweet tea, its warmth a small miracle against the chill. She would tend to Anna's scrapes with a rough, practiced hand, her silence a deeper comfort than any words could be. And once Leo had insisted. Martha had helped him down from the porch, his body awkward on his crutches, and he had made the slow, agonizing journey to the creek. He'd surveyed Anna's work, his sharp eyes missing nothing, pointing out a weakness in the foundation, a better way to brace a key log. He never stayed long. The pain was too great. But his presence lingered, a testament to their shared fight. They were a trinity of broken things building something whole in the dark. Over 3 nights the dam rose. A crude, ugly, but powerful wall of rock, mud, and timber. The creek, once a happy gurgling thing, began to pool behind it, its voice changing to a low, sullen murmur. The water deepened, growing still and dark, a reservoir of their secret rebellion. Downstream, the lifeblood of Corbin's operation slowed to a mere trickle. They were ready. The end of the week arrived with a sky the color of lead. A tense waiting silence fell over the farm. They didn't work. They watched. Shortly after noon, 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Not the lazy pace of the sheriff, but the hard, purposeful gallop of men bent on a grim task. Corbin, with Sheriff Miller and a hired man whose face was a blank slate of casual brutality. They reined in their horses in the yard, the air crackling with menace. Corbin's eyes, small and hard as pebbles, took in the quiet farm before moving to the porch where Martha stood, a shotgun held loosely in her arms. Leo was just inside the doorway, his chair hidden in the shadows. "The day is here," Martha Corbin sneered, swinging down from his horse. His gaze was a physical violation. "I've come to collect. The farm, the house, everything. This land is not yours, Corbin." Martha said, her voice steady as the rock beneath her feet. Corbin laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The law says otherwise. Miller, give her the papers." The sheriff dismounted, but his eyes were darting nervously toward the dry gully where the creek should have been. "Mr. Corbin, the water." Corbin's head snapped around. He strode to the edge of the creek bed, his boots kicking up puffs of dry silt. His face, when he turned back, was a mask of thunderous rage. "What is this witchery? Where is my water? This is our land," Martha repeated, her voice ringing with cold defiance. "The water is ours to give, and we've given none to you. You can't do this." Corbin roared, his face turning a blotchy red. He stabbed a finger at Anna, who had emerged to stand beside Martha. "This is her doing. The cursed tramp I ran out of town. Miller, arrest them. This is theft. Sabotage." Sheriff Miller looked from the 2 resolute women in the shadows in the doorway to Corbin's apoplectic face. He shifted his weight, his hand hovering over his pistol. "Now, Mr. Corbin, maybe we should let the circuit judge—" "To hell with the judge," Corbin spat. He turned to his hired man. "They built a dam. We'll tear it down. Now." He strode toward the south pasture, his men following. This was it, the moment Leo had predicted. As they passed the barn, Leo's voice, sharp as a rifle crack, shot from the shadows of the porch. "On a now." Corbin and his men paused, confused by the command. They looked back. Anna was gone from the porch. She was running not away but alongside the barn toward the high bank overlooking the swollen wading pool behind the dam. They saw her then, standing above the choke point, a long, heavy iron pry bar in her hands. She jammed it into a space between 2 key logs at the heart of the dam, a space Leo had instructed her to leave. "What is she doing?" Miller yelled, a note of real panic in his voice. Corbin realized their intent too late. "Stop her," he screamed, drawing his own pistol. But Anna put her entire weight onto the bar. There was a deep, groaning crack of timber under immense pressure. Then a splintering shriek. It wasn't the dam that broke. It was the linchpin Leo had designed, a trigger for the trap he had laid in his mind. The key log shifted, unleashing not a leak, but a torrent. The full furious weight of the contained creek, a brown churning wave of water and debris, did not just burst forward. It erupted sideways, redirected by the angled foundation of the dam, turning the dry gully where Corbin and his men stood into a flash flood channel. The world dissolved into a deafening roar as a wall of water slammed into them, sweeping horses and men off their feet in an instant of pure elemental chaos. The roar of the water was the sound of a world being broken and remade. From her perch on the high bank, Anna watched the chaos unfold. The flash flood, a furious, muddy beast of their own creation, tore through the gully. It was not a killer. It was a judgment. It swept Corbin and his men off their feet, tossing them in the churning current like broken dolls, their power and menace washed away in an instant. Horses screamed and scattered. Pistols were lost to the muck. When the main force of the wave had passed, leaving a swamp of debris and ruin, the three men struggled to their feet. They were disarmed, gasping, covered in a thick coat of mud and humiliation. Corbin's face, a mask of disbelief and sputtering rage, was almost comical. He had come as a king to claim his territory and was left a pathetic, mud-caked fool. The earth had given its verdict. As Corbin finally found his footing, his eyes wild with fury, he looked toward the house. His threats died in his throat. Martha stood at the edge of the new, wider creek, the shotgun resting with casual purpose in the crook of her arm. On the porch, Leo had wheeled his chair into the open, a rifle now lying across his lap, its long barrel glinting in the pale light. He had never been helpless. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to fight. Anna began to walk down the slick, muddy bank, the heavy pry bar still held in her hand. She was no longer the girl on the auction block. She was the woman who had moved the earth. "You'll hang for this," Corbin shrieked, his voice a ragged edge of hysteria. "Assault. Attempted murder. I own the law in this valley. The law you owned just got washed downstream." Corbin, Leo's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as splintered ice. "You will get on your one remaining horse. You will ride back to town and tear up our note. You will forget this farm and our names. Or this story, the story of my leg, the story of this flood, the story of the woman you drove from her own home gets told to the circuit judge in Cheyenne. I wonder who he'll believe." Corbin stared, his mind finally grasping the totality of his defeat. He was ruined. The flood had not just taken his dignity, it had armed his victims with a truth he could no longer bury. He turned his venomous gaze on Anna as she approached. "You," he spat. "A worthless piece of—" "No," Anna said, her voice quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced him. She stopped a few feet from him, meeting his hateful stare without flinching. "You took my home. You stole my name. You left me with nothing. You will not do it again." She looked down at his muddy, powerless form. "There is nothing left for you here." There was no more fight in him. Only the sour, curdling shame of a bully who had been beaten. Without another word, Corbin turned, found his terrified horse, and hauled his mud-soaked body into the saddle. Miller and the other man followed, a miserable, defeated procession. They rode away, not looking back, their retreat a final, unspoken surrender. The storm was over. The quiet that came after was the sound of healing. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of work. Not the frantic secret labor of rebellion, but the slow, steady work of reclamation. They repaired the gully, their hands working together to tame the water, to guide it back to its rightful path. They didn't speak of what had happened, but it was there in the new, easy silence between them, in the shared glances and the small acts of unspoken care. One evening, as the setting sun painted the clouds in hues of rose and gold, Anna was sitting on the porch steps, watching the light fade. Leo wheeled his chair out and stopped beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "He said my name was a curse on this land," Leo said finally, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "After the accident, I started to believe him." He turned his head, and his stormy eyes, now clear of bitterness, met hers. "My father built this farm with his bare hands. I thought I had lost it. I was so angry I forgot how to fight." He took a shaky breath. I could not have done this without you, Anna." The words were simple, but they held the weight of a lifetime. "We did it together," she whispered. He reached out his calloused hand, covering hers on the step. His touch was warm, solid. A promise, and for the first time she saw him smile. A true, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and changed his entire face, chasing the last of the shadows away. Martha stepped out onto the porch, a silent witness to the quiet moment. She looked at them, and the hard, grief-etched lines on her face seemed to soften. "When I brought you here," she said to Anna, her voice thick with an emotion Anna had never heard before, "I was fulfilling a promise to my son. But it wasn't the promise you thought." She looked from Anna to Leo, her gaze encompassing them both. "This farm needs more than just hands to work it. It needs a heart. It's your home now, Anna. If you'll have it." Anna looked at the worn farmhouse, at the resilient woman and the strong-willed man beside her. She looked out at the land, which was no longer a place of exile, but a place of promise. She had been bought for $1, a worthless, broken thing. But here, in this house of wreckage, she had finally found what was priceless: her family, her home.